Let me call the hearing to order. Good morning. The committee meets this morning to consider the nomination of Ms. Christine Warmuth to be Secretary of the Army. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank you for your willingness to return to public service. Thank you very much. I also want to welcome your husband, Mr. Drew Kipper, and your mother, Mrs. Dina Wormuth, who are with us this morning. And I'd like to acknowledge your daughters, Rachel and Madeline, and other family members who I'm sure would have liked to have been here in person, but because of pandemic restrictions are proudly watching from home. We thank them for their continued support of your service to our nation. Finally, I want to recognize and thank former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, who will be introducing Ms. Wormuth this morning. Thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for your service and your presence. As we consider Ms. Wormuth's nomination, I note that she has a wealth of experience in defense and national security policy spanning 25 years, both in and out of government. She has served in multiple senior leadership positions at the Department of Defense, as well as with the highly regarded public policy research organizations, including her recent tenure at the RAND Corporation. I also want to acknowledge the historic nature of this hearing. If confirmed, Ms. Wormuth would be the first woman to be the Secretary of the Army, and I'm pleased that we have finally reached this moment. Ms. Wormuth, as Secretary of the Army, your primary responsibility will be the manning, training, and equipping of Army forces to ensure that the service is capable, in conjunction with other branches, for providing for the defense of the United States. In the process of providing forces to combatant commanders, you will need to navigate the perpetual tensions among end strength, mobilization, modernization, and readiness. The Army is fundamentally about people. The Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville, has committed to the Army being a people-first organization, not just for soldiers, but their families, Army civilians, and veterans. To be a people-first organization, the Army must show commitment through its policies and practices. However, a trip I took to Fort Hood with Senator Inhofe deepened my concern about the cohesion of the force. Our military continues to show the strain of 2 decades of continuous deployments. The Fort Hood report showed that too many commanders do not know their troops and too many troops do not trust their commanders. And issues such as racism, extremism, sexual harassment, and sexual assault have, in too many instances, gone unchecked. Ms. Wormuth, these are issues that will require your direct and immediate attention. I would ask that you share with the committee this morning how you would plan to address these issues. Historically, the Army has struggled to effectively modernize. The establishment of Army's Futures Command and the associated reorganization of related commands injected tremendous energy into modernization efforts, and Congress has provided the service-wide latitude to make programmatic and structural changes and has supported the Army's efforts. However, creating such new authorities has created tensions between civilian and military acquisition officials. As Secretary of the Army, you will face difficult decisions on these modernization efforts. You will need to be clear-eyed in defining the Army's appropriate role within the joint force and multi-domain operations, and you will need to ensure that the spirit and intent of civilian control of the military is appropriately executed. Lastly, the Army must continue to improve its readiness in the context of long-term strategic competition. I applaud the Army's ongoing focus on large training exercises, including the Defender series in Europe and in the Pacific, and its leadership in the Project Convergence series. These large-scale events not only test system capabilities and exercise critical skill sets to include mobilization and deployment of the force, they also facilitate joint and coalition training, reflecting how we would fight in future operations. The Army has also introduced REARM, Regionally Aligned Readiness and Modernization Model, to synchronize all Army components across regions and provide predictability to the formations under your supervision: Regular Army, National Guard, and the Army Reserves. This effort has great promise. Ms. Wormuth, if confirmed, you enter an Army in transition and will face China as a pacing threat, revanchist near-peer land threats in Europe, and counterterrorism requirements remaining in the Middle East and Africa. These challenges will require thoughtful, resolute leadership. Thank you again for your willingness to serve our nation. I look forward to your testimony. And now let me recognize the ranking member, Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's Ms. Wormuth. It's great to have you here today. We look forward to your confirmation, and it's nice to see Chuck Hagel back, too. So we look forward to your introduction. As I've often said, the world is the most dangerous place. We all understand that now. We face the threats we have not faced before. Our competitors have gone to school in the American way of war, and they are rapidly modernizing their militaries to exploit our vulnerabilities. We're all aware of that. China and Russia combined to spend more to modernize their militaries than we are. Now you're the first service secretary nominee to come before us, and we got a couple of Army guys up here, so we have a little bias on this. And I would tell each one of you the same thing, that if you're given insufficient resources to meet the mission, we're here to help. But we do not have time for that sort of Washington drama. Our adversaries, especially the Chinese, are outpacing us. Each of the services should be focused on providing the forces and the combatant commanders need to keep up the pace. The Army has quite a lot to contribute in the 2018 NDS. You and I talked about that, and your commitment to this blueprint is impressive, very impressive, and I do appreciate that. I've been pleased at the Army to drive and adapt to new operational challenges in the Indo-PACOM, from the developing and new land-based strike options to standing up multi-domain task forces. We wrote the Pacific Deterrence Initiative last year, in part because we are not present enough in the Western Pacific, and the Army understands that. So we will look forward to your testimony and look forward to serving with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Now it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel to introduce Ms. Wormuth. Mrs. Secretary.
Good morning, Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce Christine Warmuth in support of the President's nomination of her to be Secretary of Army. As Senator Inhofe just noted, a few of us have had some experience with the Army, and as an old Army sergeant, it's truly a privilege to introduce the President's nominee for Secretary of Army to the Armed Services Committee. You all have Ms. Warmuth's bio, an impressive work record over many years in varied national security positions. So I'm not going to repeat what you already have. Instead, I'm going to tell you a little about how I know her, how I've worked with her, my experience with her, and my knowledge of Ms. Warmuth. I've known and worked with Christine Warmuth since February 2013, during my time at the Pentagon as Secretary of Defense. But I've known who she was through my previous positions as a United States Senator, co-chairman of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and chairman of the Atlantic Council. When I became Secretary of Defense in February 2013, Ms. Warmuth became an important part of my team. She held the position of Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Forces. She worked closely with Undersecretary of Defense Jim Miller and the Deputy Undersecretary Kathleen Hicks, who this committee has just recently confirmed to be the Deputy Secretary of Defense. In early 2014, I recommended to President Obama that he nominate Ms. Wormuth to replace Undersecretary Miller, since he was leaving, as well as Deputy Undersecretary Hicks. The President nominated her, and she was confirmed by this committee in mid-2014. Undersecretary Warmuth and I worked closely on many issues. Her experience, leadership, and good judgment were essential to fulfilling the serious responsibilities that DoD had during that time and continues to have. Ms. Warmuth led the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review, working closely with the Chairman and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the military services. Her leadership was especially important during the Ebola crisis in 2014-15, where she worked closely with the Army, AFRICOM Command, the White House, and all the intergovernment agencies involved with the Ebola effort. Ms. Warmuth's leadership and long experience was critical to helping the Army's further develop, strengthen its capabilities, its vision, and also understand and lead its role, what the Army's role was during these developing times, during a period of great power competition, particularly its warfighting concepts, strategies, capabilities, and needs for the future. While serving as the Senior Director for Defense Policy at the National Security Council before joining DoD, she worked closely with Secretaries Gates and Panetta's teams on the 2012 Defense Strategic Guidance, which revised DoD's strategy and signaled the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. Her extensive efforts working on suicide prevention, sexual assault and harassment, and support to military families and veterans, and all quality of life issues for our military and their families were particularly impressive. When I told Ms. Warmuth that I intended to recommend her to President Obama to be Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, I also told her that I intended to recommend to the President that Bob Work be Deputy Secretary of Defense and Mike McCord be Undersecretary Controller. The point was, I wanted a team that would work closely together. She never wavered from that commitment and was an effective and respected leader as a strong member of a very impressive team. In February 2015, I awarded Christine Warmuth the Distinguished Public Service Award, which, as you all know, is the highest award that can be given to political appointees. In the citation, I said, and quote, Ms. Warmuth played a vital role leading the department's efforts to degrade, destroy the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, regularly providing strategic advice to the Secretary of Defense, engaging with members of the interagency to formulate policy, and briefing members of Congress on key developments. Amid a significant budget uncertainty that we were dealing with at the time, Ms. Warmuth was a critical voice in the department deliberations aimed at aligning the department's strategy with its resources. After Ms. Wormuth left the Pentagon at the end of the Obama administration in 2017, she took on new senior director roles at the Atlantic Council and RAND, where I again worked with her as a member of the Atlantic Council's International Board of Directors and RAND's Board of Trustees. As I noted in my introduction of Mike McCord on Tuesday morning, the indispensable requisites of leadership are character, integrity, courage, and judgment. If any of these are missing, the journey will not end well. If the person does not possess a sense of humanity and decency, they are not fit for leadership. Christine Warmuth possesses all these essential requirements and a successful experience to warrant her confirmation. I'm proud to introduce Christine Warmuth this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Inhofe, for allowing me to present my introduction of Ms. Warmuth for your consideration of President Biden's nomination of her to be Secretary of the Army. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and I particularly want to thank you for your service as a sergeant, probably the high point of your contribution to the United States of America. I say that as someone who cannot claim that distinction of being an NCO in combat. Thank you very much. Ms. Warmuth, your statement, please.
Good morning, Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm deeply honored to come before you today as President Biden's nominee for Secretary of the Army. I'm grateful for your consideration of my nomination, and I'm also very grateful to this committee for its long and bipartisan commitment to our national security. Thank you, Secretary Hagel, for being here in person today and giving me such a lovely introduction. It was a privilege to work with you when you were Secretary, and it's a particular honor to be introduced today by the first and only old Army sergeant who was also Secretary of Defense. If confirmed, I hope to follow your example of leadership that never lost sight of the brave military members and their families who serve our nation and who are at the heart of everything we do in the Army and the Department of Defense. To my husband, Drew, a retired Navy officer, don't hold it against him, thank you for your love, optimism, and support no matter what comes our way. My daughters, Rachel and Madeline, are off in college now, but they're always in my heart. I have been blessed with a strong and wonderful family who has taught me to strive, lifted me up, and modeled service to others. Thank you, Mom, for being here today and every day, and thank you, Jennifer, for all that you do as a caring and capable surgeon. My mother's father, Arthur Dean Wilkins, was a World War II Army veteran. My father-in-law, Bill Kipper, served in the Army during the Korean War. My sister serves today in the U.S. Army Reserves, and my stepson-in-law serves in the National Guard. While I have not served in uniform, I chose to serve in a different way, as a career civil servant in the Department of Defense, and later I had the honor of serving as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It has been the privilege of my career to work alongside and see firsthand the sacrifices soldiers and their families make, as well as all they achieve when answering the nation's call time and again. I could not be more humbled and proud to have the opportunity to serve as Secretary of the Army and to ensure that we continue to provide the Army with what it needs to succeed. Title X gives the Secretary of the Army many responsibilities, but fundamentally the job of the Secretary is to lead the Army, to lead change in the Army, to be a strong advocate for the value of land power, both inside and outside the Department of Defense, and to build strong relationships with you, Congress, who ultimately provides the Army with the authorities and resources it needs to fulfill its mission. If confirmed, I will focus each and every day on these solemn responsibilities, working closely with the Chief of Staff of the Army and other Army leaders. I will strive to always provide candid and considered advice to Secretary Austin and Deputy Secretary Hicks in matters affecting the Army. More than at any time in my professional life, the United States appears to be at a strategic inflection point. We have a window to make needed changes to ensure that the Army continues to be the best fighting force in the world, but that window will not be open indefinitely. If confirmed, my goal will be to help the Army continue to transform to be able to compete, deter, and if necessary, fight and win. Together with this committee and others, we need to carefully examine our operational concepts, align them to meet the challenges posed by the adversaries we face, use them to drive what new advanced capabilities we acquire, and then organize, train, and equip our soldiers to employ these capabilities successfully in competition and conflict if necessary. The Army has embarked on its most ambitious modernization program in 40 years to enable it to stay ahead of the challenges posed by the realities of high-intensity, technologically advanced warfighting. Seeing these modernization programs through successfully while maintaining readiness to meet the demands of current operations will be a top priority for me if confirmed. Fundamental to the Army's readiness is its people, Army soldiers, whether active, Guard, or Reserve, their families, Army civilians, and our Army veterans. General McConville and former Secretary McCarthy placed the Army's people at the center of their efforts, and if confirmed, I intend to prioritize the full range of people issues. To ensure our soldiers and civilians have the best quality of life possible, I will strive to continue improving our Army housing, healthcare, childcare, and spouse employment opportunities. I will focus on ensuring the Army can recruit, develop, and retain the diversity of talent it needs to remain the world's premier land force. And I will do everything in my power to ensure we have a healthy command climate at every Army installation that fosters Army values and ensures the well-being of our people. There is no place in our nation's Army for sexual harassment and assault, domestic violence, extremism, racism, or other harmful behaviors that inhibit readiness. Members of the committee, if confirmed, I will seek to lead as a hands-on secretary that works closely with the Army's uniformed leadership at all levels, empowers our staff, models ethical and transparent leadership, and who demonstrates every day care for the entire Army team. I will be the strongest possible advocate for the Army inside the Pentagon and out. And finally, I would consult closely with this committee, because without regular and constructive dialogue and partnership, we will not succeed in transforming the Army to meet future challenges. I look forward to your questions, and thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Warmuth. There are a series of standard questions that we must ask of the nominees. Would you appropriately respond? Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any action that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And again, welcome, Ms. Warmuth. You are on the verge of being responsible for the manning, training, equipping, and modernization of the Army, and to support combatant commanders for their requirements. How do you see your policy and strategy background contributing to your ability to serve this role?
Well, Senator, I've had the opportunity over the course of my career on a number of occasions to think about what kind of a national defense strategy we need, and then to think about what that means in terms of the kinds of capabilities and forces that our nation needs to have to fulfill that strategy and meet the needs of the strategy that we have at the time. So I've had the opportunity to work, again, through several quadrennial defense reviews, probably more than I'd care to remember, and to work closely with all of the services, but certainly closely with the Army in particular, to think about what kinds of capabilities we need and how best to organize those forces and how to train and equip them. I've also, had the opportunity to, again, work closely with the services as it's had to strike the difficult balance sometimes between meeting the demands of current operations while also preparing for the future and ensuring readiness, even in very difficult times during sequestration. So I think all of those experiences would serve me well if I were confirmed as Secretary of the Army.
Thank you. As you indicated in your statement, as I indicated in my statement, sexual harassment and sexual assault remain very significant issues within the force. And as I indicated, Senator Inhofe and I had the opportunity to travel to Fort Hood. And what we discovered was that the prevention program, the education program, the SHARP program as designated by the Army, was basically non-existent but below the brigade level. It was check the box. It was, I think, a major contributing factor. And one of the issues that you have to deal with is prevention. Adjudication is important, but I would rather prevent the crime than bring the accused to justice. But what are your thoughts on how to increase the focus on prevention?
Senator, I very much share your view that we need to do more in terms of preventing sexual harassment and sexual assault. I think that the Army has, begun to focus on that more through creation of the "This Is My Squad" framework, if you will, or it's really more of a mindset as I understand it, but I think it's very much comes from a place of trying to do a much better job of educating our soldiers that we are all on the team and on the squad together. I think that initiative will be helpful in terms of restoring a much healthier command climate. I think using the cohesion assessment teams that the Army has stood up to go out and survey other installations to try to get ahead of the kinds of problems that we saw at Fort Hood will be a good step. But if confirmed, I would want to look at what more could be done. In my own experience, I think there are types of training that could be helpful with prevention. And I'm not talking here about more PowerPoint slides that people just sort of go to mental screensaver on. I'm talking about training that's much more hands-on and gets people involved in scenarios and talks to people about bystander training, because I think that's something else we want our soldiers to, if they see something happening, be part of stopping it.
Well, thank you very much. In one of your advanced policy questions response, you referenced the potential risk if the authority and flexibility in modernization programs is too far removed from the actual production of the platform or item. There could be a situation where we are not wisely investing in such a program. So given the ambitious timeline for fielding new equipment, what steps do you take to manage the risk across this program?
Senator, this is something that, if confirmed, I very much want to be hands-on, as I said in my statement. I think that the stand-up of Army Futures Command was very, as you said, put a lot of energy around the Army's modernization programs. But I think to try to make sure that we keep our programs on schedule and at the cost that we have been planning for, I'll want to look carefully at the work of the cross-functional teams. And I would in particular like to see the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Logistics and Technology, that part of the staff, work very, very closely with Army Futures Command. I think there has been some friction there, and I'd like to try to do everything possible to make sure the whole team is working together given the challenges in the program.
Thank you very much. Senator Inhofe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, I want to say, to our witness for giving me the time. Had a chance to visit last week, and as we discussed during that time, I think we can all agree that the 2018 NDS, with its emphasis on great power competition, as we discussed in my office, accurately assesses the current strategic environment, and the Army will continue to play a major role in this environment. Now, back in 2014, the Defense Review of that year, it recommended cutting the size of the Army based on the lack of threat from Russia. Now, the first mention of Russia in that document says the U.S. is willing to undertake security cooperation with Russia. Well, times have changed, and the situation has changed, and I would ask you a two-part question. One, as logistics become more contested, including cyber threats, do you think that those assumptions should be changed today? And has the evolved threat from Russia changed your thinking on what kind of Army the nation needs?
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. I'll take the second question first, if I may. You're absolutely right. Circumstances have changed with Russia. I think we see, I think of Russia as being a rogue nation that is something of a risk taker with Vladimir Putin at the head. And I think we need to be very mindful of the challenges that Russia poses. It is one of the few nations that poses an existential threat to the United States. And I think, as we've seen recently in its aggressive behavior right at Ukraine's border, that this is something we need to watch very carefully. And I think there's very much a role for the Army in particular in Europe to provide a strong deterrent to make Russia think twice about any kind of aggressive action against NATO, for example. So I I support the forward headquarters of 5th Corps, for example, in Poland. Would like to keep working through the European Deterrence Initiative to further strengthen our posture vis-a-vis Russia. And to your point on contested logistics, I think it's fair to say there is a much greater appreciation today than there was in 2014 for the possibility of the challenges associated with projecting power from what I would call a disrupted homeland. So logistics, and that's one of the reasons there's a joint concept underway for contested logistics. I think we would want to carefully examine assumptions around logistics in the ongoing strategy review.
Well, great response. I appreciate that. The other area, there have been a lot of changes. In 2018, the Army leadership identified 6 essential modernization priorities, and since then, the Army has realigned over $35 billion to fund these modernization priorities. Now, there have been a lot of changes, but I'd ask the question now, based on the 2018 NDS, do you agree that the Army's assessment that long-range precision fires is still the top modernization priority?
Senator, I'm pretty comfortable with that assessment. I think the long-range precision fires portfolio is a very important one in the Army's overall modernization program, and is particularly important in the Indo-Pacific, although it's also relevant vis-a-vis Russia as well.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Inhofe. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you. Congratulations, Ms. Wormuth, on your historic nomination, and thank you for your willingness to come back into public service. You mentioned the fact that I think it's your stepson, you said, is a member of the National Guard, and you also talked about the importance of the people of our military and our Army. They are the reason that we have been so successful. I'm concerned that over this past year, we've witnessed the National Guard really deploy virtually nonstop to handle pandemic relief, civil disturbances, to administer vaccines, protect the U.S. Capitol, a whole myriad of activities. In New Hampshire, we've had more than 900 Guard members who have deployed to support our COVID relief efforts. We could not have gotten through this last year without them, but they've been consistently on deployment for more than 400 days. And we also just sent a battalion to a unit from the 1st Battalion, 169th Aviation Regiment to Kosovo. And of that unit, 10 had previously been deployed and 1 was on a 6th deployment. So as we think about what we need and the important role of our National Guard, are you concerned with those prolonged high operational tempo of deployments, and have you given any thought to what we might do to address the impact on those Guard members and their families?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. First of all, I want to take the opportunity to just thank the National Guard for the tremendous work that it has done in the past year in particular. As you said, they have really stepped up, and in a time period that's been difficult for all of us. And so thank you to all of our National Guard for everything they've done. I am, of course, concerned about the possibility that there are, unreasonable or unhelpful demands on the National Guard, as well as the reserves. So if I were confirmed, I would want to look closely at, with General Hokanson, Chief of the National Guard Bureau, to look at exactly how that strain is manifesting and whether his assessment is that there is undue stress on the force. I think, we have to be, particularly with our citizen soldiers, we have to be mindful of the fact that they are balancing their service in our military with their civilian careers and their responsibilities with their families. And frankly, from a recruiting and retention standpoint, if we are overly taxing the Guard or the reserves, that can be damaging for recruiting and retention. So it's something that I would want to look into, and I think there are tools to help manage places where there's undue strain, and that's something that also the new rearm readiness model, I think, will be helpful in trying to make the requirements more predictable for folks in the Guard and Reserve.
Well, thank you. One aspect of that is the complexity of retirement, health care, and education benefits that the Guard receives. And as you know, there's a difference between when they're deployed on state orders under Title 10, Title 32, and the complex health care transitions that are caused by going off and on different orders. So do you think we should re-examine those benefits, and would you commit to being part of an effort to take a look at those and see how we can better ensure that Guard members know not only what's expected of them, but what they can receive as the result of what they're doing?
Senator, if confirmed, I would be happy to look into the status of the benefits and how they're provided and whether that makes sense. I know that we've done a tremendous amount in recent years to try to shrink the number of different duty statuses just to sort of help us with that, and I would be happy to look into the issues that you've raised and come back and talk with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheen. Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Wormuth, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for your really lifetime of service in the department in many different roles, and to your family for their many different family members who have served the country in uniform as well. As you prepare to take over the Army, I want to highlight something that was troubling to me recently in the news. The Army University Press has published guidance that they will no longer use the term Union Army in their publications when writing about the Civil War. I think this is political correctness run amok. U.S. Grant, of course, in his memoirs frequently wrote about the term Union Army, and I think that we can all agree that unconditional surrender Grant knows a little bit more about Civil War history than do bureaucrats at the Army University Press. So could I get your commitment today that you're going to insist that the Army, in all of its educational and academic roles, is going to reflect our common understanding of our history and not write terms like the Union Army out of academic papers or books?
Senator Cotton, I certainly grew up learning about the Union forces myself. If I'm confirmed, I would be happy to look into this and make sure that we're not writing the term Union forces out of our history.
Thank you. I think most normal Americans who learn their Civil War history in ninth grade and are proud of what men like U.S. Grant and William Sherman did would be glad to hear that as well. Could also get a commitment on professional military education that will make sure that it's focused on what our senior leaders need to know to perform their roles, to lead their troops, and especially face off our main adversaries, countries like China and Russia?
Yes, absolutely. I am a firm believer that our professional military education is essential, frankly, particularly as we are moving into a period of great power competition where so many of our officers have spent the last 20 years focused on learning about issues in the Middle East. It's essential, in my view, that the PME curricula be reoriented to make sure that we are teaching our officers what they need to know about the challenges they'll face.
Thank you. Turning to programmatic matters, unfortunately, I think you're going to be presiding over the Army during a period of budgetary constraints. When you look at the Army's key modernization priorities, which one of those do you think are the most important to prioritize if you're facing a constrained budget?
Well, Senator Cotton, as I said, I generally share the Army's current assessment that the long-range precision fires priority is the top priority. But there's also a lot of interdependence among the six big categories. So I'll want to, if in fact there is a requirement to make hard choices, I'll want to look very carefully across the entire modernization program.
Why do you think it's the long-range precision fires that is the most urgent or the highest priority?
Well, I think, Senator, it's the highest priority in my view because of the need to address the anti-access area denial challenges that we face in both Europe and Indo-Pacific. And, given the quite sophisticated integrated air defenses that we'll likely be facing, I think it behooves us to develop capabilities that allow us to strike targets from very long distances.
I agree, especially in the Western Pacific. That's one reason why I think it was so important that we finally leave the INF Treaty, because China has built up thousands and thousands of missiles, And although many people think of a potential conflict with China as primarily being driven by the air and naval battle, obviously you can carry a lot more rounds in the magazine, so to speak, from ground-based precision fires. That would be the Army's domain. Another possible budgetary constraint you could see is if the Department of Defense, not the Department of the Army's overall top line is constrained, and there are urgent priorities that can no longer be postponed in the Air Force and the Navy, then the Army may end up having money taken out of its hide. Maybe the easiest place to come down there is the reduction in in-strength number of troops. What are your thoughts on the current in-strength and where it needs to be in the future?
Well, Senator, first of all, I would say, I don't think anyone would be well served by looking at the Army as something of just a bill payer.
I don't either, but I'm afraid that might be the direction it's going if the budget comes in where it's been reported.
And because that's my view, and because I will be a very strong advocate for the Army if confirmed, I think I would look very carefully and be quite skeptical of proposals to make major cuts to force structure. I would not want to see us return to the days of 15-month-long deployments and regular use of stop-loss. So I will certainly be a strong advocate for the Army in the event that we have to make hard choices.
Thank you. One final question. I've raised this with your predecessors. I raised it with General Milley when he was the chief, and with General McConville at their hearings will be your wingman. The Army has all these great modernization priorities. Soldiers don't want to ride around in a next-generation combat vehicle. They want to ride in a Bradley or an Abrams. They don't want to shoot an extended long-range cannon. They want to shoot a Paladin. They don't want to fly in future vertical lift. They want to fly in an Apache or a Black Hawk. Can you commit to me, as your predecessors did, General McConville and General Milley, that we're going to give these things good names that motivate our soldiers as opposed to long bureaucratic names?
Senator, absolutely.
There's a lot of great generals like Pershing and Eisenhower and Grant and Sherman, a lot of great young soldiers who've won the Medal of Honor over the years. Soldiers need to be motivated by the glorious history of their Army. They don't need to be riding around in vehicles with 8-word names that have acronyms that are unpronounceable.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Let me recognize Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wormuth, great to visit with you. Congratulations on your nomination. I would like to ask you to start off and just talk about the Army's progress on dealing with the military housing challenge. You and I talked, and I feel like the Army might have been suffering the most difficulty in this area, but I've been pretty pleased with how the Army has moved out on dealing with the challenge. Please give me your assessment of where we are and what we need to do to continue to make progress.
Thank you, Senator. I think the Army did undertake a pretty large reorganization to get its arms around the very significant problems that it was having in housing by making the Army Materiel Command, and underneath that, the Installation Management Command, responsible for keeping their eye on this issue every single day. And so our 3-star at IMC meets with the heads of the privatized companies on a weekly basis to go over exactly, which houses are being worked on at particular installations. We now have, I believe, quarterly town halls with soldiers and their families at major installations to give people the opportunity to talk about concerns they have in their housing. I think these have been good steps forward. And if confirmed, I would want to continue to have that very regular focus and a lot of very close cooperation with the companies that are handling the privatized housing.
Thank you for that. Last week, my colleague Senator Sullivan and I had a hearing in the Readiness Subcommittee, and one of our witnesses, Dr. Ray O'Toole, is the acting director of Operational Test and Evaluation. He told us something that shocked both of us. Basically, all the weapons programs that they evaluated in FY20, none of the weapons programs they evaluated in FY20 were survivable against relevant cyber threats. I've been on the Readiness Subcommittee for over 8 years, and we get routine reports on service readiness measured in terms of equipment, personnel, and training. However, we don't measure how ready our forces or weapon systems are to counter cyber threats. If confirmed, will you work with the committee to make sure that the Army is prepared to meet cybersecurity threats, and even examine the question of whether our readiness metrics should start to include assessments of how capable we are to meet those threats.
Senator, if confirmed, I would be pleased to work with you and the committee on this issue. I am greatly concerned, frankly, by the threats that we face in the cyber domain. All you have to do is look at the long gas lines that are probably happening in your neighborhood right now as a result of the Colonial Pipeline situation. And, you know, I think those kinds of threats are a serious issue, both to the integrity of the modernization programs that we have underway, as well as to the integrity of our secure communication network. So I would be very happy to work with you, and cybersecurity is something that, if confirmed, I will take very seriously.
Last question I have is about Army's arsenals. I'm pretty involved in shipyard optimization in my work with the Navy, given the heavy Navy presence in Virginia. But my sort of more top-line understanding of our Army arsenals is that there's also significant need for investment and modernization in those arsenals. What can you tell me about how you would prioritize that issue should you be confirmed?
Well, Senator, my understanding, based on a variety of war games that I've had the opportunity to participate in, for example, underscore to me that munitions are going to be incredibly important, and having sufficient inventories of munitions. So I would certainly be interested in looking at our arsenals in the Army and making sure that they're ready to do what we need them to do.
Thank you very much. Look forward to supporting your nomination. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. Let me recognize via WebEx Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Warmuth, first of all, let me just say thank you for taking the time to visit with me last evening. I really did appreciate the discussion that we had. I want to just identify two areas that I think I'd like to get your thoughts on, and allow you to share your concepts of how we move forward. And I think Senator Kane started talking a little bit about the cybersecurity. I'd like to follow up specifically with regard to the direction from the NDAA that was passed in FY20. It said that each military department secretary would appoint an independent principal cyber advisor. This critical advisor may not assume any other position or responsibility in the military department, must be independent of the service chief's information officer, and must also advise the service's senior uniformed officer. This advisor must have a seat at the table during senior leader meetings and forums to assure cybersecurity measures, actions, programs, and policies are synchronized and coordinated and basically brought into the framework and fabric throughout the department. I'd like you to share with us your thoughts on that, and I'd really like your commitment that, if confirmed, you'll get back to us within your first 60 days in office to review the Army's implementation of this mandated requirement.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. I would be very pleased, if confirmed, to come back with you and talk in detail about Army's current cyber plans, both on the capability side and also on the security side. If confirmed, I would intend to work very closely with my principal cyber advisor. I think creation of that position in each of the services was very beneficial. Frankly, the cyber domain, again, is an area in my experience where, we really need to have some more specialized expertise. So I think having someone advise me and be able to work closely with me would be very, very useful. I also think it would be beneficial for the principal cyber advisors of all of the services to be able to work together and collaborate and share lessons learned and best practices.
Thank you. I just, my time is going to expire shortly. With your background in defense policy at OSD and your time at RAND in Georgetown, I'm curious to hear your perspective on how the Army basically will look at the competition with an aggressive China. Specifically, that part which is sometimes boring to talk about, but it has to do with the logistics of fighting in that AOR. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts about the seriousness of what we face the distances, the timing involved, and so forth that the Army will have to face and come up with regard to how you're going to handle logistics in that AOR?
Yes, Senator. Well, as you know, in the Indo-Pacific, the distances are extremely long, and I think will present some very, new challenges for us in terms of joint logistics. One thing that I think would be helpful would be to develop a more distributed forward presence in the region to try to help us manage the challenges of those contested logistics. I also think, if confirmed as Secretary of the Army, I would want to work closely with my counterparts in the Air Force and the Navy, because frankly, as you know, many of you know, the Army does not self-deploy, unlike the Air Force and the Navy. And so getting ground forces to that theater will, to some degree, require, obviously, working with the Air Force and the Navy. And I know, for example, there are some real issues, I think, on sea lift, for example. So thinking about the Army's logistical challenges in the context of the broader joint force would be something that I would want to focus on if confirmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on being our first woman nominated to be Secretary of the Army. It's exciting, and I'm sure you are up to the task. As you know, fighting sexual assault in the military is one of my most important issues and requires a positive command climate where survivors feel safe disclosing their assault. Obviously, with the Fort Hood report, the Army has not been acquitting itself well in this regard. What's your current assessment of command climate, and how do you intend to improve it?
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand, and thank you for your leadership on this issue over the years, as well as a number of others on this committee. I know this has been something you've been passionate about, and as a woman, I particularly appreciate that passion and focus. I read the report of the Independent Fort Hood Review Commission back in February, cover to cover, and when I was done, I was extremely angry and frustrated. I think the Commission's report, makes plain that the Army has real issues when it comes to this topic, and I think there's quite a bit of work to be done. I think it was very prudent of the previous Secretary to fully accept all 70 recommendations of the Independent Review Commission. If confirmed, I would be completely committed to fully implementing those, not just at Fort Hood, but across the entire Army, where applicable. I think, the Army has started to take some steps that I think will improve the command climate, such as sending those cohesion assessment teams out to other installations, as I talked about. But I think there's more work to be done. And again, as I said in response to an earlier question, I think we need to put quite a bit of focus on prevention programs, but also really pushing a positive command climate down to the lowest possible level so that those junior enlisted soldiers, between 17 and 24 feel safe, feel protected, and are looking out for each other.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you share my concerns, and I'm glad you have committed to implementing all the recommendations of the Commission, including taking sexual assault out of the chain of command. I think that will be something that President Biden's 90-day review will also recommend, taking those serious crimes out of the chain of command. And I hope you will continue to commit to implementing those recommendations as Secretary of the Army.
Yes, Senator, and I look forward to getting the results of the independent commission that Secretary Austin directed. I will be very interested to see what recommendations they make.
Me too. As chairwoman of the Personnel Subcommittee, I held a hearing 2 weeks ago on cyber personnel issues. Given the serious threats our nation is facing from Russia and China alone, having a strong cyber force is more important than ever. In the hearing and in my conversations with cyber experts, there have been a number of recommendations to strengthen our cyber force, including as part of recruitment and retention efforts. I'm asking for your commitment to work with me on these important issues to help create a stronger, more adaptable cyber force.
Senator, I would be happy to work with you on that issue. I think it's essential that we be able to recruit and retain qualified cyber experts into the Army and into the broader military. That can be challenging, as you can imagine, in terms of trying to compete with the private sector. So I think we need to try to think creatively about how we can bring that kind of talent and keep it in the Army.
I agree. And we're working on some ideas. And so I look forward to getting your input on that as well. I also want to mention in my last minute, the Army Combat Fitness Test. On the subject of retention, I remain very concerned about the retention issues posed by the Army Combat Fitness Test, mainly its effects on retaining women and those with specialty roles like our JAGs, medical personnel, cyber warriors, which is why I've pushed for a provision in the last NDA to pause and have the test independently evaluated. May I have your commitment that you will keep me and my staff appraised on the results of this independent study? And can I also have your commitment that the Department of Army will be fully transparent in sharing any necessary data and information with me and my office regarding the ACFT?
Yes, Senator. If confirmed, I would be happy to share that information with you. I know RAND is actually, I believe, undertaking that independent assessment. And again, I would want to look carefully at that myself. I also have concerns, obviously, about the implications of the test for our ability to continue to retain women, which we obviously want to do. I do think it's important for the Army to have a physical fitness test that tests the kinds of combat skills soldiers will need to have a test that prevents injuries, which I think the new test is designed to do much better than the old one. But we want to make sure that we are not indirectly penalizing anyone. And I think the Army's decision to, for example, allow women to do a plank rather than the leg tuck is a good example of adapting in a way that I think is helpful.
I agree. Thank you so much, and good luck, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. And let me now recognize Senator Ernst, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mrs. Warmuth, thank you so very much for your willingness to step forward once again and serve our nation in this capacity. You are certainly making history by charting course as our first female nominee for Secretary of the Army. 30 years ago, I was commissioned into the United States Army Reserve. And at that time, the opportunities for women were very limited. Women could not participate in combat arms. They were cut out of various leadership positions because they weren't able to be in combat arms. We had very few civilian female leaders within the scope of the Army. And now, knowing my daughter and her peers will be commissioned next year in 2022, and she will go into the United States Army. And I am so thankful that she will have a strong, intelligent, and well-qualified woman leading our United States Army. So God bless you for breaking those barriers and for being the right person at the right time. And I wish you well. So once confirmed, and I can assume your confirmation, you can't, but I can, you will have a very challenging road ahead. We do have a number of issue areas out there that do need attention, and we all will need to ensure that our soldiers are prepared while we are able to modernize our Army and to defeat those threats globally, as have been discussed. I do look forward to working with you in the years to come to ensure our Army and our wonderful soldiers have the critical resources necessary to win on the modern battlefield. An area of interest that Senator Shaheen had brought up earlier was our National Guard forces. I retired out of the National Guard just a few years ago. And certainly they, through the last 20 years or so, have really been put to the test, and you acknowledge that. And thank you for recognizing that through COVID, through the natural disasters that we have throughout our states. We had a derecho in Iowa that our Guard soldiers responded to. They were here in our nation's capital, and we have soldiers in Kosovo as well. As Senator Shaheen has said, and we also have them in the Middle East from the great state of Iowa. So we know that there are training challenges with those members as they are rapidly deployed, both domestically and OCONUS. And they also lack the same type of resources as their active duty counterparts. What would you do to ensure that we are maintaining their readiness levels and making sure that their equipment is on par with their counterparts on active duty?
Well, first, Senator, thank you very much for your very kind words. I really appreciate it. And if confirmed, I would certainly hope to live up to that example for your daughter. In terms of the National Guard and their equipment and readiness, I am very much a believer in the total Army and am committed to making sure that our soldiers in the National Guard have the training that they need to be ready to do what we ask of them and have the equipment that they need to be able to execute the missions that we ask them to do. So that is something that I will work diligently on. As you know, there are times when there can be disagreements about where equipment needs to go and sometimes hard choices that are made, but I will be very attentive to the fact that the Guard has training and equipment needs.
Yeah, thank you so much for that commitment. Another area of interest for me is our Army Special Operations Forces, and they have a program within Special Operations. It's called Preservation of the Force and Families, and they are committed through this program for medical care of their forces. They focus on brain and cognitive health. Those efforts are critical to SOF, but I would also like to see some of those measures extended out to our conventional forces as well. Would you be willing to collaborate with me on those efforts to make sure that we're paying attention to traumatic brain injury, to cognitive health with those conventional forces as well?
Senator, I would be happy to collaborate with you in that area, yes.
I think it is extremely important to do that. And then, just because my time is expiring, we did during our phone conversation talk about the challenge we're facing in Iowa. It's related to the large warhead manufacturing facility at the Iowa Army Ammunition Plant. It's critical that we get this issue resolved. There's a piece of equipment that we need to make sure remains in place. And once again, I do appreciate your willingness to work with me on that issue as well. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Ernst. Let me now recognize Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Warmuth, as chair of the Emerging Threats Subcommittee, I spent a lot of time considering the disruptive technologies and countermeasures being pursued by our most sophisticated adversaries and working to ensure that we can address and outmatch these efforts. As I traveled around Arizona, visiting our installations, it's clear to me that our ranges play a key role in this work. These testing environments provide significant value to our military as we focus on increasingly sophisticated near-peer challenges and strengthen our ability to leverage and integrate capabilities in AI, electronic warfare, and more. If confirmed, how will you ensure that ranges like Yuma Proving Ground and Fort Huachuca's Electronic Proving Ground are a priority for the Army? And do I have your commitment to work with me to ensure robust resourcing that can support state-of-the-art infrastructure and a robust workforce to meet the growing demand?
Thank you, Senator Kelly. First of all, I completely agree with you that the Army needs to be very attentive to challenges like counter-UAS, for example. Clearly, we are going to see artificial intelligence on the future battlefield. So those are absolutely areas that we need to be working on in terms of developing our capabilities and obviously being able to test our capabilities. So I would be pleased to work with you on making sure that we are using our testing ranges to the fullest degree possible and are making sure that we are resourcing them so that we are able to use them in the ways that we need.
Well, thank you. Fort Huachuca is also the home for a significant portion of the training for UAVs. One of the benefits of training as a former pilot myself in the United States Navy, training in Arizona is unmatched anywhere else. We have in southern Arizona 350-something days of sunshine every single year, and it's benefits the Army to do this training in Arizona. So I would love at some point, if you had the opportunity, to come out to Arizona and visit Fort Huachuca, Yuma Proving Ground, and just see the facilities we have there and the capability that we have. You know, often there are challenges that we face with, moving systems and training around. So I wanted to invite you out to the state of Arizona to visit some of our incredible Army installations, and I hope you take me up on that.
I would be happy to take you up on that. Would love to go visit Fort Huachuca, see Yuma Proving Ground, and to see our terrific military intelligence schools there.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Kelly. And now let me recognize Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Warmuth, for your incredible service and for your willingness to step in this gap, and congratulations. I hope that your staff's prepared you for my question because the details are quite complicated. But I was heartened by your statement, and I'm going to just quote a couple things. You said, fundamental to the Army's readiness is its people. Army soldiers, whether active, guard, or reserve, their families, appreciate all of that, civilians and Army veterans. And then you state that General McConville and former Secretary McCarthy placed the Army's people at the center of their efforts. Later on, you said that you want to be a hands-on secretary, work closely with uniformed leadership, and empower staff. I love empowering staff unless they do a really lousy job, okay? So I like the hands-on part too. So there's really nothing that you're going to do in your job or that we do here that's more important than taking care of our soldiers. And the problem is when a problem has to be solved by a congressional inquiry that has to go all the way to the senator themselves threatening to hold a nominee's confirmation up, that's bad. That's bad from top to bottom. So I'm trying to help a major whose pay has been incorrect for over 10 months now. I'll spare the details. It's a soldier in a family of 4 who's been underpaid over $50,000. It came to my attention 2 months ago when it was only an 8-month problem. 2 months ago. Now it's a 10-month problem. And this issue still isn't completely fixed, certainly not to my satisfaction. In fact, I'm worried that my inquiry may have slowed the process down, if you can consider slowing an 8-month delay down. And I say that because in one of the emails that we received a couple of days ago, maybe even yesterday, just the last couple of days, it's the unit that's trying to fix the issue wrote this. They said they are prohibited from any additional action now that a congressional inquiry is in place. Another email said that AFRICOM couldn't fix the soldier's problem until he closed out his inquiry. Now, I shouldn't have to tell you how that sounds. It certainly doesn't sound like the soldiers are the most important thing or that the people are the most important thing. It also troubles me that the Army might fix the problem and provide the back pay, again, exceeds well over $50,000. But because it took over 10 months, obviously there are other problems, like the benefits lost to TSP contributions or lost opportunities based on the time value of money. And, of course, the complications of tax fixes that are upcoming. So I hope you took the time to prepare for the question, because I want to make sure that your comments and your opening statement become action and that you really do care about our soldiers. I have no reason to believe you don't, unless on June 1st the soldier still doesn't have his back paid. Then I'm going to be concerned. And that the organization is going to ensure that it cares about our soldiers. So first of all, did the Army give you any excuse about why a soldier's pay issue wasn't fixed for 10 months and needed a United States Senator's personal attention before it got fixed?
Well, Senator, first of all, as my mother taught me, my mom didn't really like it when I screwed up and gave excuses. So this situation, frankly, is totally unacceptable. It is, we can't have situations where we're not paying our soldiers the money that they earn for 10 months. And the good news is my understanding is the Army is going to have this problem solved by June 1st. But from my understanding, which is not in great depth, there isn't a good reason why this happened. There's not a particularly good explanation for why this happened, other than the fact that we have a very large, complex bureaucracy. But I can assure you, if confirmed, that I will examine the particulars to make sure that we do learn lessons from this particular case so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Well, I appreciate that. That's the answer that I'm looking for. I trust you with it, but I don't yet trust the Army. I might have 8 months ago. So we're going to see how it plays out, see if I can learn some more about why this happened. In reading the email, there's some reference to the fact, we don't have people in the office anymore taking care of these things. Or I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that's a really unacceptable answer.
I agree with you.
In North Dakota, everyone goes to work, by the way. We all go to work. It's not we have a pandemic, but we still go to work. We do our jobs. If we have to do them from home, we still do them. We don't say we can't do them. We don't get paid if we don't do them. We do our work. And so we expect no less, certainly, from the leadership of the United States Army. So thank you again for your service. I share Senator Ernst's confidence in your confirmation, but I'd sure like to see some words put to action by our leadership. I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Let me recognize via WebEx Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Chairman Reed. Appreciate it. Ranking Member Inhofe for holding this nomination hearing. I'd also like to thank Ms. Warmuth for testifying today, for your willingness to serve. That's a very important position. And so I'd just like to talk about Army cybersecurity personnel, a few of the things we talked about when we were able to meet earlier this week. And so we have to really address those challenges of establishing our deterrence in cyberspace. DoD's 2018 cyber strategy outlined the defend forward approach, meaning identifying our adversaries' cyber campaigns early on, engaging in offensive operations to disrupt the attacker's infrastructure, and aggressively preventing attacks before they happen. Nonetheless, in December, it was reported that Russian intelligence successfully breached networks of multiple government agencies and private companies by exploiting the vulnerability in the SolarWinds system. So this recent attack, of course, on the United States, it demonstrates that we need to continue to increase our investments in cybersecurity, including cultivating the personnel to do these jobs, personnel who can rise to these challenges that are presented by Russia or China or whomever else in mind. So with this in mind, the DoD cyber strategy calls for enhancing our current cyber workforce, finding talented new people to recruit. So where I'd like to just build upon what Senator Gillibrand already asked you about, if confirmed, what policies would you enact to cultivate a qualified or develop a qualified cyber capable workforce to support the Army's mission, including that of Army Cyber Command? And then in order to meet surge capacity, what do you think about creating a cyber reserve program?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I think there are a few things that we could do in terms of trying to recruit cyber expertise into the Army. First, I think just in our general recruiting for Army soldiers, we could probably do more to explain to young people about the opportunities for folks who are technologically inclined to be able to perform missions that draw on those types of skills. I think that, many young people may not be aware of sort of how much more emphasis we're placing on cyber capabilities in the U.S. Army. It's not all about, driving tanks and flying helicopters. I also think that, again, as I said to Senator Gillibrand, I think we need to do more to think creatively about how to bring people in potentially laterally with those kinds of skills. There are some special authorities, I believe, that have been given to the department to try to bring in specialized expertise, but I would like to explore, if confirmed, whether we could do more on that. And then,
I'm sorry. Please go ahead. I wasn't sure you were. So go ahead.
To your point about the cyber reserve, I would be very interested, if confirmed, to explore that with you. Certainly, we leverage cyber expertise through the National Guard, for example. I know there are some specialized units that are comprised of people with, who work in Silicon Valley and so on. But there may be a possibility to have, a kind of a more strategic reserve, if you will, of people who have cyber skills that could be called into service if we needed a surge.
Well, thank you. I was going to say that I have the bill for junior ROTC to allow them to have a STEM track now. And so we're going to try to recruit those young folks, just like you mentioned, into the junior ROTC, allowing for that. And I guess finally, what I'd really like to talk about, we do have a quite robust military right now, but we may need to retrain them or upskill them, the folks that are there. So how do you envision retraining or reskilling some of the enlisted servicemen and women in the Army so that they can branch themselves out, do other things, and be there even maybe for additional surge capacity when we need it?
Well, Senator, on that issue, I think I would probably try to take two approaches if I were confirmed. First, obviously the professional military education system provides an opportunity to educate our officers and such about new skills and new areas. So that's something. And then in terms of our enlisted folks, I think I would want to look into, in more detail, if confirmed, what kinds of opportunities are there right now and see whether they need to be expanded in light of some of the new challenges, and particularly the emphasis on technology that we're going to need in the future.
Well, thank you. I see my time is up, but I would say that for everyone in the military having a basic STEM education, you talk about flying helicopters and driving tanks, computers on all of them. So we need those skills. So appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. And for the information of my colleagues, I will have to step out briefly to participate in a WebEx for the Appropriations Committee. In my absence, Senator Kelly will be presiding. With that, let me recognize via WebEx Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Warmuth, thank you so much for your time this week, for the conversation that we had. And I am going to come right along with what Senator Rosen was talking about, with having people there in the Army with these skill sets that are specific to technology, STEM, and cyber. And she and I are working on different components of legislation with ROTC on STEM, looking at a cyber civilian reserve corps, the National Guard as a ready response unit that can work remotely when we have cyber attacks. So you can feel assured we're going to come to you with some of those conversations. Let me, I want to go back to something that we discussed, and that is Afghanistan. And our conversation around Afghanistan, we had talked about a quote that you had given in March when you were reflecting on your time with the Obama administration. And I'm quoting you now, and I want your response to this. We persuaded the president to keep troop levels steady in Afghanistan, something that we felt was required from a national security perspective. Successfully persuading him to change his mind was a really big deal. So I understand from our conversation that you're comfortable with the current president's decision to withdraw troops this September because we've achieved what we set out to do. Your comment. So elaborate on that view that you have, and then as the voice of the Army within the Biden administration, would you speak truth to power when it comes to really assessing this situation as it has evolved on the ground and making certain that we do not lose the ability to support the Afghani army and the Afghan people in protecting themselves against these terrorist groups?
Thank you, Senator Blackburn, and thank you for the conversation that we had earlier. I am comfortable with the administration's decision to withdraw our troops, our military troops from Afghanistan this coming September. I believe that we have achieved our objective of halting Afghanistan from being used as a launch pad to attack the United States. I think the members of our military, and certainly our Army soldiers in particular, can be very proud of what they have done in Afghanistan. But I think at this time, we owe it to those soldiers and their families to conclude that it's time now to move to other future challenges. In terms of, looking to speaking truth to power, if confirmed, I absolutely would provide my candid advice to Secretary Austin and Deputy Secretary Hicks. As Secretary of the Army, I don't think I'll be weighing in on the policy discussions, but I certainly know from previous experience that U.S. Central Command will be looking very carefully at how it can best monitor the situation in Afghanistan in terms of future terrorist threats. And certainly we will be continuing to provide assistance to the Afghan security forces from a financial perspective so that they can continue to work to defend themselves.
When it comes to our departure from Afghanistan, we're going to leave a void, and China is going to try to step into that void. So how do you assess China's impact on Afghanistan and looking at it through the lens of our departure?
Well, Senator Blackburn, my own sense is that to a certain degree, first I should say China, I think at various points has tried to be helpful over the years in terms of working on the challenges in Afghanistan. But they also have been, something of a free rider in the sense that, they've been happy to have the United States of America and our military providing stability there. And I think with the decision to withdraw our troops, to the extent that there is perhaps, less stability going forward, that will be something that China will actually have to grapple with, along with countries like Pakistan and Iran and others in the region, in a way that they haven't had to do so in the last 20 years.
Okay. My time is expiring. I have a couple of other things I'm going to submit to you for the record, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now recognize Senator Warren via WebEx for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Ms. Wormuth, for being here, and congratulations again on your nomination. I just want to spend some time talking about military housing this morning. But before I get to that, I want to ask you about two other issues. First, Fort Hood Independent Review made clear that the Army has not made any progress on addressing sexual assaults. Will you commit to making significant improvements in this area a top priority?
Yes, Senator, I will absolutely make it a top priority. And as I've indicated, I would like to see us put more emphasis in particular on trying to prevent incidents of sexual harassment and sexual assault.
Good. And then second, there is no way to address the climate crisis without confronting the Department of Defense's role as the largest consumer of fossil fuel on the planet. Will you commit to using all of the tools and authorities at your disposal to make the Army more climate resilient and to reduce its carbon footprint whenever possible?
Senator, yes, I would certainly like to look into how the Army can do more to make itself more resilient in the face of climate change, for example, more fuel efficient. We are undertaking some efforts already, but given the scale, for example, of our vehicle fleet, I think looking at the extent to which we can pursue electrification of our vehicle fleet would be a place where we could make a contribution, and it would also help us on the battlefield by reducing our dependence on things like fuel convoys.
Good. So I look forward to following up with you on both of these issues. Now, as Secretary of the Army, you will oversee the largest military service and be responsible for the well-being of hundreds of thousands of service members across the globe and their families. And in the last few years, we have heard countless stories from military families about the deplorable conditions of on-base privatized housing. Reports about substandard rotting houses filled with lead paint and black mold and rodents. And these stories are widespread. Children and families are getting sick as a result. And despite multiple hearings and changes in the law that we passed, my office is still hearing from military spouses that the problem isn't getting any better and that landlords are not following the rules that are supposed to protect tenants. Ms. Wormuth, do you agree that substandard military housing presents a serious challenge to military readiness?
Yes, I do, Senator. I think it poses challenges for readiness, but also for retention.
Yes. And if confirmed, will you commit to using all the tools available to hold these landlords and private companies accountable to make sure that they build and they maintain quality housing for service members and ensure that these outfits can no longer profit from substandard housing?
Yes, Senator, you have my commitment.
Good. I appreciate it. You know, unfortunately, these conditions and their consequences are the result of bad behavior from companies that DOD hired to manage these properties. For years, they have failed to properly maintain military families' homes, and they've escaped accountability by doctoring their numbers and sweeping complaints under the rug and raked in millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, in the process. So there it is, sexual assault, climate change, military housing, all of these affect military readiness, but for too long, the military services have paid only lip service to this reality. It's time for that to change, and I look forward to working with you to make that happen. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Let me now recognize Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Warren, welcome. Congratulations on your historic nomination. I'm looking forward to working with you. We had a great conversation the other day and just listening to the questions. I can't imagine the enormity of dealing with all the problems you're getting ready to face, but it'll be fun, it'll be challenging, and just talking to you, you're well prepared. Looking forward to it, I'm sure, and it'll be a huge challenge, but working through all this, at the end of the day, we've got to have somebody that can protect this country, you know, and I know you're up to the challenge. You're going to be dealing with egos. I hope you'll keep as much politics out of it as possible. You know, just a small realm of coaching, I dealt with egos and, of course, thousands of fans and all that, and you try to please everybody, but you can't do it. At the end of the day, you got to get your job done and understand your final goal. You know, if the National Defense Strategy recommends a 3 to 5% Department of Defense budget increase per year. But this year, it looks like we're going to receive less than half of that. You know, how do we absorb this hit in the Army? How do you foresee that for the future of? You just heard barracks, housing going down, all the things, the problems that we're having, climate change. How do you work those battles yourself?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. I think, first of all, we have to make sure that that we have a strategy that aligns to its resources. And if I'm confirmed, I'm going to look very carefully at the resources that are given to the Army to do its job. And I'm going to be the strongest possible advocate I can be to making sure that it has the resources it needs, precisely, as you said, to deal with all of these different challenges. I think, if there are in the future places where difficult choices need to be made, I would be guided by a couple of things. First of all, trying to strike a balance between current operational needs and preparing for the future, which I think is very, very important given the kinds of challenges we face from China and Russia. And then also trying to strike a balance between the size of the Army and its force structure, the readiness of those forces, and then the modernization program that I think is very, very important. You know, my own view is that having a larger Army that is equipped with old equipment is not going to serve us well in the future. So those are some of the things that I would be looking at.
Thank you, and you strike me as somebody that would get in your car and go to the White House and say, we need more money because we want to help you. You know, the defense of our country is the most important thing for the people that live here. Yeah, you can strike everything else out. You know, if we don't have a secure country, then we've got huge problems, and you're going to be a big factor of that. 35 million young men and women have the capabilities of being selected into the armed service every year. 35 million that we have to choose from. Only 450,000 of those are really eligible and can pass all the qualifications to be selected in any form of the military. 450,000 out of 35 million. That's not a lot. How do you foresee recruiting, you know, for the Army in the near future out of such a small pool with a lot of these kids that would normally get in the military, but hey, they're going to go to big tech, make the big bucks, and bypass a possible future in defending our country?
Senator, it's absolutely true that we face a lot of competition when it comes to recruiting for the Army. A smaller and smaller number of young Americans show the propensity to serve in the first place. But as I understand it, at this point in time, the Army believes that it's going to meet its recruiting targets for this year. I think the Army has, particularly during the pandemic, been very creative and in pivoting pretty quickly to virtual recruiting. We've expanded from really focusing on 22 cities to more than 40 cities around the country. We have a program called Urban Access where we're actually really focusing on Los Angeles and Houston to try to reach out to, communities that may not have previously thought about joining the military and joining the Army. But I think that's something that we're going to have to continue to work hard on, particularly as the economy rebounds. We will face competition with the private sector.
Thank you. With all the Army personnel we have in the state of Alabama, I want to invite you to Redstone Arsenal and then Fort Rucker that does all the vertical lift for our country in terms of helicopters and training. So welcome. Look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tocqueville. And now let me recognize Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Wormuth, congratulations on your nomination, and we certainly appreciate your willingness to serve our country. Ma'am, the 46th Military Police Command of the Michigan National Guard serves as one of two command and control elements in the National Chemical Response Enterprise. It has experienced a cumulative 25% decrease in funding from the Army over the past 3 years, and I believe it's unwise to shortchange some of those critical elements of emergency preparedness. We talked earlier about these kinds of efforts, and my focus on these efforts as the chairman of Homeland Security Committee here in the Senate. So if you could respond kind of your thoughts on these units and how important they are, and would you be in a position and willing to look at addressing the shortfall that we're seeing with these critical units?
Thank you, Senator. I would be happy to look into that specific issue with you. As you and I talked about a little bit when we met, I am very much of the view that we need to have a capability here in the United States to deal with chemical, biological, radiological types of incidents. That is, an important part of our homeland defense capability, which remains relevant. And so I would be happy to look into that and gain a better understanding of what the resourcing issues are there.
As the Army embraces multi-domain operations by standing up 5 multi-domain task forces, I certainly believe that the National Guard should be home to one of these. In my mind, it's critical that reserve components, which obviously compose a big part of the Army's overall force structure, has the capabilities and the experience to operate in this space. So my question to you as Secretary, if confirmed as Secretary of the Army, how will you approach allocating the remaining multi-domain task forces?
Thank you, Senator. Well, first of all, as you likely know, the Army is experimenting right now with its multi-domain task force in Fort Lewis. And we are still working through developing exactly what kinds of capabilities that particular formation will have and how it will operate. I think, I will want to look carefully, if confirmed, at where we're going to position those units, both in terms of whether it's here in the United States or perhaps overseas, and also whether those task forces should be in the active component or potentially in the reserve component. I would want to look at what makes both sense, but I think it's useful to reflect on the fact that another one of the Army's, sort of more specialized formations, the Security Force Assistance Brigades, the Army did make a decision to put one of those in the National Guard. So I think there's a track record there of making smart decisions about allocating those forces.
Madam, given the President's executive order from January 27th of 2021 and the rapid advancements as well as significant investment in battery technology development from our commercial automakers, what steps would you take, if confirmed, as the Secretary of Army, to focus efforts on the electrification of the Army's both tactical and combat vehicle fleets?
Well, Senator, from the perspective of resilience and making the Army more fuel efficient, I think it's very much something to look into, is the degree to which we could potentially pursue electrification in our vehicle fleet. So that's something that if I were confirmed, I would certainly want to look into to understand how deeply we can pursue that. I think the infrastructure associated with charging vehicles and making sure that we can have batteries that have sufficient staying power would be things we'll look at, but it's certainly an area I'd like to pursue.
One component of the Next Generation Combat Vehicle Program, which I'm proud to say is being run out of the Detroit Arsenal in Warren, Michigan, and is the armored multipurpose vehicle, the AMPHI. This program currently is in production and begins fielding to soldiers later this year. The AMPHI resolves significant capability gaps associated with some of the legacy systems that we have, and will provide the Army with a more survivable and more mobile vehicle as well. Could you speak to the importance of this program and your commitment of providing soldiers the modernized equipment that they need, if confirmed as Secretary of the Army?
Certainly, Senator. Again, I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that the Army has not comprehensively modernized itself in over 40 years, really since we had the Big Five. And so it's very important going forward that a big part of our modernization portfolio is next generation vehicles. And that is something that I will be focused on and paying attention to. It's absolutely a capability set that we have to have and that we have to modernize, just as we will modernize helicopters, for example, or actual equipment for soldiers in terms of their own lethality.
My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Let me recognize Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Warmuth, good to see you again. I really enjoyed our meetings and discussions. Thanks for your patience on that. Let me kind of follow up on what we talked about. I'd like to get your commitment here to visit Alaska soon. There's a lot going on in terms of good things. There's a couple troubling things I want to talk about too, but get you up there with some of our top military leadership. Can I get that commitment soon in your tenure?
Yes, Senator, I'd be happy to visit.
And then we talked about the Army's Arctic strategy. I think it's a really good document. As you and I talked about, there's been a lot of work, kind of implementation work at the highest levels of the Army. And the Secretary of Defense, actually, and the Deputy Secretary were in front of this committee saying they were committed to fully resourcing Arctic strategies by the different services, of course, including the Army. So as you and I talked about, can I get your commitment to get back to me with General McConville, if confirmed within 30 days, on looking at the implementation of the Arctic strategy? What I worry about is, as you and I talked about, sometimes these issues can fall back into the bureaucracy, lose the sense of urgency that we clearly have right now, and I don't want to lose that. So can I get your commitment on that as well, like we talked about?
Yes, Senator. Thank you first for your leadership on issues relating to the Arctic and for recognizing its strategic importance. And I would be pleased, if confirmed, to come and talk with you with the Chief of Staff of the Army about the implementation plan.
Great. Thank you very much. So I always give this book to pretty much every new nominee. Have you read T.R. Fehrenbach's This Kind of War? It's about the Korean War.
I actually have that book, Senator. Yes, I do.
Good.
I haven't read it in a while. It's been a while.
All right. Well, then I guess I don't have to give it to you. But good. I'm glad you've read it because it's, it's called a study, essentially in lack of readiness. The United States in 1945 probably had the most fearsome military in the history of the world. And by 1950, because of civilian and military leadership decisions and cuts, the lack of readiness was horrendous, and thousands of Americans died senseless deaths in the summer of 1950 because of the Korean War era's military lack of readiness. We never want to go back there. The Army has a saying, no more Task Force Smiths, that I'm sure you're familiar with, all your leadership in the Army is familiar with. So can I get your commitment to make sure we don't fall in this hole of readiness plummeting? The last term of the Obama-Biden administration saw defense spending cut by 25%, and as you know, the readiness of our forces plummeted.
Senator, the Army has worked very hard in the last few years to rebuild its readiness, as you know, and I think has done quite a good job on that. And if confirmed, I certainly would want to ensure that we maintain our readiness.
Great. It's a high priority. This committee, there'll be battles, right? The Biden administration is floating their defense budget, which will be cuts, which I think is ridiculous. If we're going to have the ability to compete against China, we got to do a lot of things, but cutting our military is a cause for celebration in Beijing, and I hope you get in there and fight for a strong budget. Can I get your commitment in that regard as well? I know you got to support what the president ultimately does, but as you're battling, we need people in there who are fighters for a strong military and strong budget.
Yes, Senator. As I said, if confirmed, I intend to be the strongest possible advocate for the Army inside the building and outside the building. I believe in a strong defense, and you have my commitment that I will make my views heard on that matter.
Great. Speaking of a strong Army, I'm going to raise a really troubling topic. Over the past 5 years, U.S. Army Alaska has experienced 32 suicides. In that same period, from 2016 through 2021, soldiers deployed under Operation Freedom Sentinel in Afghanistan experienced 41 combat deaths due to hostile action. Any death is horrible, but think about that juxtaposition. 32 soldiers in my state in garrison, compared with 41 total in Afghanistan. That's just a difference of 9. This year alone, USARAC has experienced 6 suicides, an average of 1 soldier per month. Of course, we all believe this is unacceptable. Can I get your commitment? And by the way, I do think the command, Major General Andresiak and others, have put their heart and soul into this issue. General McConville has, even General Milley as chairman has. But we have challenges. Some of it relates to training, some of it relates to remote locations. Can I get your commitment to fully resource the initiatives that USARAC and the Army have put forward on quality of life initiatives and infrastructure aimed at reducing this, really, let's call it a horrendous trend level that we can get beyond? There's a lot of attention to it, but I need your commitment to provide the utmost attention to this issue, which is really a horrible issue, not just for Alaska, not just for the Army, but for America. These are some of the best young men and women our nation has, and they're taking their lives.
Senator, I share your deep concern for the suicide rate in the Army, which right now is higher than it's been in some time. And I'm particularly concerned about the concentration and number in Alaska. So if confirmed, you certainly have my commitment to do everything possible to try to make sure there are programs in place and quality of life in place to do our best to prevent further suicides.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Let me now recognize via WebEx Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Warmuth, I was very pleased to see you nominated to be the first woman to serve as Secretary of the Army, especially given your considerable experience as a civilian national security leader and your previous tenure in the DoD. After speaking with you the other day, I am confident that you are the right person to lead the Army. I would like, however, to follow up on our discussion on the Army's major modernization programs. As a former soldier and as the chair of the Air-Land Subcommittee, I understand deeply how important it is that our Army have modern weapon systems to compete with our near-peer challengers. However, resources are not unlimited, and I take my duty to safeguard taxpayer dollars very seriously. It is absolutely critical that the Army leverage best practices to run its major programs efficiently and to deliver high-quality systems to soldiers on time, on budget, and in alignment with Army modernization priorities. That is why I'm encouraged by programs like Future Vertical Lift, which so far has delivered impressive results. If confirmed, how would you work with the Army's cross-functional teams to discover lessons learned from programs like FVL and apply best practices across programs where possible to deliver the necessary capability to soldiers and improved values for taxpayers?
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. It's nice to see you. I will, if confirmed, will want to be working closely with each of the cross-functional teams to understand where we are in the 6 big modernization priorities. And to the extent that there are valuable lessons learned, for example, coming out of the Future Vertical Lift set of programs, we'll want to make sure that we share those lessons with other cross-functional teams, whether they're in the long-range precision fires portfolio or the air and missile defense portfolio, just to name a couple. I think that's an area where I'd like to see the strongest possible collaboration between Army Futures Command and the acquisition staff in the Department of the Army.
Thank you. Based on our conversation, I know you share my concern about the unacceptable rise of white nationalism and other extremist ideologies in the military. When service members hold these hateful views, it undermines unit cohesion and violates the oath that they took to protect and defend our Constitution. Since his confirmation, Secretary Austin has taken the first steps to root out extremism among military members, starting with a DoD-wide stand-down. If confirmed, how would you support Secretary Austin's efforts, and what policies would you pursue to detect extremist ideology in our military ranks, prevent its spread, and improve media literacy and access to reliable information in the DoD?
Well, Senator, first of all, I want to say that I think, the vast majority of our Army soldiers serve with honor. And I think that the numbers of soldiers who hold extremist views is likely small. But as you noted, and as Secretary Austin has noted, extremism in our ranks undermines unit cohesion and can have a disproportionately negative effect. So it's very important that we work to identify it and get it out of the ranks. I'm very interested, if confirmed, in getting briefed on the lessons learned that came from the DoD-wide stand-down that you referenced. I'd like to better understand, what we think was particularly successful coming out of that process that could be applied more broadly and, and on a routine basis going forward. I do think there probably is more that could be done in terms of educating our soldiers when they join the Army about the use of information and disinformation in social media and things like that to try to help our soldiers become more savvy, customers in terms of being able to identify when they're perhaps being targeted with disinformation.
Thank you. My final question is about the Army SHARP program. Like many members of this committee, I'm committed to addressing the scourge of sexual assault in the military and was proud to help Senator Gillibrand introduce her Military Justice Improvement and Increasing Prevention Act as an original co-sponsor. I have appreciated your responses so far on this topic, but would like to add that in the wake of Vanessa Gillen's tragic death last year, I asked the GAO to conduct a review of the Army's SHARP program. That work is underway, and they should deliver that final report later this year. If confirmed, will you commit to reviewing GAO's work when it's released and incorporating it as appropriate to improve the Army's SHARP program?
Yes, Senator. I'm committed to taking good ideas from wherever they come from. I'm very familiar with the kind of work that the GAO does, and I would be very interested, if confirmed, at looking at the results of their review of the SHARP program and seeing how we can strengthen it, in addition to what the Army has already undertaken in terms of a redesign as a result of the Independent Review Commission.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to being able to vote for you for your confirmation. And Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. Senator Sullivan has an additional question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to follow up on my friend Senator Duckworth's line of questioning. By the way, she is, when you look at soldiers who have sacrificed for our nation, I think it's probably safe to say she's sacrificed probably more than anyone in the entire Congress as a soldier, so I always have a deep respect for her views on all of these issues. But, you know, she touched on really what I think the Army leadership has been referring to as bad behaviors that hurt unit cohesion, that hurt the ability for the Army to be an effective fighting force. Those, of course, include sexual assault, sexual violence, which is completely unacceptable. We need to do more in that regard. I actually have a lot of respect for Senator Gillibrand's hard work in this regard. Suicide, we've already talked about that. I do want to mention this issue of extremism, racism. Of course, we don't want that in the ranks at all. And I've put forward legislation that tries to address this issue and ask deep questions of the Pentagon, particularly at promotion rates for our senior officers. Like, you know, are we promoting, is there something going on at the top ranks that we need to address that relates to, you know, sometimes the lack of diversity? I've had a lot of discussions with Secretary Austin on this topic, and of course that can have negative effects, as you just said. So, but here's what else can have negative effects, in my view, and I think it is possibly having negative effects because I talk to military members all the time. There are wild claims. Just pick up the Washington Post every day, they seem to make them. Through anecdotes that somehow our U.S. military is a hotbed of extremists, racists, at very high levels. So I care about this issue because we don't want that. But every time someone makes it, I'll give you an example. The now Undersecretary of Defense for DOD, the number 3 guy in the DOD, came here to his confirmation hearing, said he was going to stamp out systemic racism in the ranks. Whoa, that's a pretty big claim. Then I asked him, did he have any data to back that up? You're kind of besmirching a lot of people. An organization that throughout American history hasn't been perfect, but has probably been on the forefront of bringing the races together. Again, not perfect, but organizations, the military, that have in many ways done more to advance racial equality than almost any other organization in the country. And yet there are these claims. The number 3 guy in the Pentagon right now made a claim. When I pressed them on it, no, Senator, I don't have any data. Well, then why are you making that claim? I'm hearing from troops saying, look, we agree, we don't need this, but there's this counter argument that you pick up the Washington Post and every day there's an article about, 10, 15, 20% of the military is extremists. That's just baloney, and I'm going to tone down my rhetoric here in a hearing. So can I get your commitment to protect these troops from these kind of wild claims until you look at the data? I've had senior military members here just in the last couple of weeks asking them, do they think it's 10%? Do they think it's 5%? Do they think it's 20%? To be honest, they're offended. As you just said, it's probably not many at all. If they're there, we should crush them and get them out. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the military is not, we're not letting people who don't know anything about the military, like these Washington Post reporters, make claims that somehow the military is a hotbed of tens of thousands of racists. I don't think it's true. What's your view on that? But the key is data. Let's get data before we make these giant, sweeping claims like the Undersecretary of Defense did. I don't know how the hell he's going to lead the Pentagon, number 3 guy in the Pentagon, after he made some wild claim that he had no data on. He even told me in this hearing, no data. I just said it. What's your view on this? It's a really important issue, and trust me, the average soldier is watching. And they want someone to try to defend them, not besmirch them.
Senator, as I said, in my experience, the vast majority of soldiers serve with honor.
Yes.
I think the vast majority of soldiers are tolerant and inclusive in terms of working with their peers. So, again, I don't think that this is a case where there are large numbers of extremists, for example, and I do think it would be useful to have additional data. As you said yourself, there are certainly surveys, I think, that show that there are some pockets in some cases of racist behavior. There are still some institutional barriers to promotion, for example. But I think things like something I'm very encouraged by is the Army's new command assessment program that is which is a whole terrific new evolution of how we select our leaders. But one of the things that program helps us look at is attitudes and, making sure that our future leaders are inclusive and tolerant.
Great. Well, if you can just commit, get the data before any of these wild claims continue, I think that would be helpful for our forces, helpful for our military, helpful for broader society. But the military has been, in many ways, on the forefront of a lot of these issues, and we want to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. And thank you, Ms. Warmuth, for your testimony today, for your service for many, many years, and your willingness to serve again, and I look forward to that service. With that, I will adjourn the hearing.